The legal basis, Siobhan, was something called the ecclesiastic abstention doctrine, which basically stems from or flows from the religious clause in the First Amendment, or the religion clause in the First Amendment, and says that civil courts shouldn't get into the business of interpreting religious doctrines or tenets. And if they are in a position where they need to do that to decide the case, they basically need to abstain or not decide the case.
So does that mean a case can never be brought against a church or religious institution?
No, not necessarily. There are many cases that could be decided by civil courts without getting into the religious doctrine. One example is a church contracts to have their parking lot paid, and they don't pay the bill. And the asphalt company or the paving company sues and says, hey, breach of contract. Well, the court doesn't need to get into any type of religious tenets or doctrines to decide that case. The problem is most cases aren't that clear cut. They're not on one end or the other. They're somewhere in the middle.
What strikes me is that the priest did promise one thing and then did something completely different. Cruel or at least insensitive, some people would say.
Yeah, I would say that. And so did the lawyer for the archdiocese, and even the lawyer who was also the lawyer for the priest. He said this was, without question, insensitive. The question is whether or not the court needs to get into religious doctrines to decide the things that had been claimed, or the elements of each of the case that was brought by the family, or really the mother of the decedent. And I think if maybe other claims were made, there were certainly, I listened to the oral arguments in this case, and I think that at least one of the judges would have ruled differently if, for example, it was a breach of contract case. They said, hey, we promised to make a contribution to the church. We were going to get a certain type of sermon in return that was promised to us. We got something totally different. But they didn't claim that. They claimed other claims or torts, what the law calls, like intentional infliction of emotional distress, which the court said we're going to require them to get into the religious doctrine and tenets.